We all know the legend, we know the big boy. We think it was the biggest, baddest machine ever to roam the earth. But we are wrong. Hidden in the mountains of West Virginia, there was a monster that was heavier, more powerful, and far more dangerous than the big boy. They called it the Allegheny. But there was a problem. It was too big for its own good. They built it too heavy. This machine was so massive that the engineers had to lie about its weight just to get it approved. When it finally hit the tracks, it didn't just pull trains. It pulverized the steel beneath it. It crushed crossties, warped bridges, and hammered the rails until they snapped. It was the ultimate example of American superpower gone wrong. This is the story of the 600-ton beast that destroyed the very road it was built to save. Why did they build a machine that was illegal to run? And why did the most powerful train in history die so young? Coal was the lifeblood of the war machine. In 1941, the demand didn't just climb, it exploded. Steel mills ran day and night, shipyards swallowed entire mountains of fuel, and the Chesapeake and Ohio found itself choking on its own success. The Allegheny Mountains stood in the way, a wall of granite and grade that turned every train into a test of strength. On the west slope, the rails clawed up at more than 1.5%, a number that meant nothing to the generals in Washington, but everything to the men trying to move 10,000 tons of coal over the summit before dawn. Every day, more tonnage was ordered. Every day, the trains grew longer, heavier, slower. The old engines, the two 882s and the T1 class, fought gravity and friction, but they were losing ground. Double heading, triple heading, helpers shoved from the rear, but the line still backed up for miles. Coal cars waited in endless rows at the base of the grade, each one a reminder that the front lines burned through fuel faster than the railroad could deliver it. The War Production Board sent telegrams. No coal, no steel, no steel, no tanks or ships. Delay was not an option. The pressure was relentless. Dispatchers cut sleep to keep the line moving. Track crews patched the roadbed under rolling blackouts. Every timetable was a gamble, every missed delivery a liability. The Chesapeake and Ohio civil engineers watched the numbers with a growing sense of dread. The mountain wasn't getting any lower. The trains weren't getting any lighter. Something had to give. So the order went out. Build us a machine that can move the mountain. Give us horsepower no one's ever seen. The specification sheet landed on Lima Locomotive Works' desk like a declaration of war. There would be no compromise, no half measures. The railroad was betting its entire future on a single radical solution, a weapon built to conquer the Alleghenies at any cost. Lima Locomotive Works didn't hesitate. The Chesapeake and Ohio's demand for power landed on their drafting tables like a gauntlet, and the answer came back in steel and fire. Build an articulated monster, but keep it short enough to spin on the old turntables. Articulation was the only way to cheat the laws of geometry. By splitting the driving wheels into two sets, each with its own frame hinged in the middle, the Allegheny could slither through curves that would have derailed a rigid engine of the same length. On paper, it was a masterstroke. More wheels, more grip, more raw muscle, all packed into a frame that still fit the existing infrastructure. But that hinge was only the beginning. Lima's engineers, high on their own superpower gospel, started stacking en masse wherever it promised more fire or more steam. The firebox became a cathedral, 135 square feet of roaring coal, suspended over a 6-wheel trailing truck built to bear the weight of a small house. The boiler ballooned to monstrous size, its crown sheet stretching 27 feet, its guts lined with nearly 7,300 square feet of heating surface. Cast steel frames ran the full length of the engine, thick enough to resist the writhing torque of 4 massive cylinders. Every component was oversized, overbuilt, and overconfident. The result was a machine that didn't just meet the specification, it obliterated it. The Allegheny's total length, just under 125 feet with its angled tender, barely fit the Chesapeake and Ohio's biggest turntables. But the real cost was measured in tons, not inches. Every pound of extra steel meant more force pounding down into the rails. Still, the mood in the design office was triumphant. This was the weapon that would break the mountain's back. No one wanted to ask what it might do to the earth beneath. The first time the Allegheny rolled onto the factory scales, the air in the room thinned. Supervisors crowded around the readout, some still clutching blueprints that promised a 720,000-pound Titan. Already a stretch, but deliverable. The needle did not stop at 720,000. It kept climbing past 750,000, then 770,000. When it finally settled, the number staring back was 778,000 pounds. That was not just over budget, that was the weight of a Sherman tank smuggled aboard, multiplied by a dozen. No one spoke at first. The scale operator checked the calibration. An engineer ran the numbers again, tracing the firebox, the boiler, the cast steel frame, each a cathedral of excess. Every pound had a purpose, or so Lima's designers claimed, but the total was a heresy. In that moment, the machine on the scales was not a locomotive. It was an industrial crime scene. Paperwork had to be filed. The number was too big to ignore, too heavy to explain away as a rounding error. But the war clock was ticking, and coal had to move. In the back offices, a decision was made quietly, without signatures. The official weight would stay at 724,500 pounds, just as the brochures promised. The real number, the one that made the rails sweat, would be whispered only among those who had to reinforce the bridges and reballast the ties. That day, the rules bent under the same pressure as the steel. The Allegheny's true mass became a secret shared by a handful of men, each one complicit in the gamble. They knew the track charts, the bridge ratings, the cost of every extra ton. But the machine was already built, and the mountain was waiting. The only thing heavier than the locomotive was the silence that followed. The order stood. 60 engines, no changes, no apologies. On the books, each Allegheny weighed a respectable 724,500 pounds, just as the brochures said, just as the contract required. But inside the boardrooms, the numbers told a different story. Lima's accountants penciled in the real total, 771,300, sometimes 778,000 pounds, then quietly filed it away. Chesapeake and Ohio's legal department read the weigh sheets, ran their own calculations, and felt the blood drain from their faces. The discrepancy wasn't a rounding error. It was a second locomotive, hidden in plain sight, riding on the rails with every shipment of coal. Still, the production line never slowed. The war needed coal, the railroad needed engines, and every delay was another telegram from Washington. So the paperwork stayed clean. The contract minutes from 1941 and 1942 show no amendments, no penalties, no public arguments. The silence was bought and paid for, first with extra ballast and overtime, then with thousands in back pay to engine crews who noticed their wages didn't match the new tonnage. The men who drove the Alleghenies knew exactly what they were pulling, and their union made sure the railroad did too. By 1944, the tension had seeped into the legal files. A draft lawsuit appeared, $3 million claimed against Lima for breach of contract, for every pound the engine wasn't supposed to carry. No court date was ever set, no verdict ever recorded. The threat alone was enough to keep the conversation behind closed doors. The engines kept coming off the line, heavier with every batch, each one locking the railroad deeper into a bet it couldn't afford to lose. The Allegheny was no longer just a machine. It was a liability, a secret so large it had to be absorbed into the very bones of the railroad. The infrastructure would bend, the finances would bleed, but the coal would keep moving. That was the deal, and everyone at the table knew it. Physics doesn't care about paperwork. The Allegheny delivered its verdict every time it left the yard. 778,000 pounds, but the true violence came in how that weight was distributed. 6 driving axles, each shouldering nearly 86,000 pounds, more than any other engine ever built. That's not mass, that's pressure. Imagine a giant, not with broad feet, but with stilettos, each step driving directly into the earth, slicing through the rails instead of spreading the load. The Union Pacific Big Boy, for all its fame, wore snowshoes by comparison, 8 drivers, weight spread wide, a gentle giant. The Allegheny was a bully, its force concentrated, uncompromising. But static load was only the beginning. Once the throttle opened and the rods began to move, the real punishment started. 4 pistons, each the size of a beer keg, drove those wheels with a stroke that could rattle teeth. Every revolution sent a surge of unbalanced mass, steel rods, and counterweights, slamming down with a force that didn't just sit on the rail, but hammered it. At 45 miles an hour, the so-called hammer blow could spike the vertical force to more than 100,000 pounds per axle, twice what the track was ever meant to handle. The rails flexed, the ties groaned, ballast shifted under each passing wheel. The steel flowed like putty under the repeated assault. The numbers on the charts became cracks in the web of the railroad. Railheads kinked sideways, gauge spread, until wheels threatened to drop between the rails, and bridges, already old before the war, sagged under repeated shock. Maintenance crews called it a war of attrition. The Allegheny didn't just run the line. It battered it, reshaped it, forced the earth beneath to yield or break. Every trip was a physics lesson written in bent metal and shattered stone. The track crews called it a rebellion. Every morning, the Allegheny left behind a trail of destruction that had to be patched before the next monster came thundering through. Inspection logs filled with red ink, rails kinked sideways, tie plates sheared, ballast squeezed out from under the sleepers like toothpaste. The ground itself seemed to recoil. Where a normal locomotive left a mark, this one left scars. Men worked by lantern light, shoveling crushed stone into the wounds. Ballast trains ran almost as often as coal drags, dumping car after car of granite just to keep the roadbed from sinking. Reballasting wasn't scheduled maintenance anymore, it was triage. Sometimes the crew barely finished tamping the last tie before the next Allegheny barreled over the hill, shaking the fillings out of their teeth and undoing a night's labor in a single pass. Slow orders multiplied. Sections of track that once saw 45 miles an hour now limped along at 20, then 15, as the rails lost their shape and the gauge spread wider with every pounding axle. Crews watched for the telltale silver streaks where the wheels had climbed too close to the edge. Foremen kept a running count of cracked fish plates and broken spikes, each one a warning that the line was losing the fight. Bridges were the worst. The old iron spans groaned under the concentrated blows, their rivets working loose, their decks sagging inch by inch. Track gangs set up hydraulic jacks and shims, fighting to keep the structure level as the Allegheny's weight tried to drive it into the river below. Even the newest concrete piers showed hairline cracks after a year of service. The maintenance budget bled dry. Ballast contracts ballooned, overtime became the rule, and the workforce aged in dog years. Some men joked that the Allegheny should have come with its own track gang, a rolling disaster followed by a permanent crew. But nobody was laughing when the paychecks bounced or the section foreman handed out pink slips. The railroad wasn't just running coal, it was running a losing battle against its own creation. On the spec sheet, the numbers stand in cold judgment. The Allegheny's official weight, 724,500 pounds, never matched what the track crews knew in their bones. Every reweigh, every maintenance log, every battered bridge pointed to the same truth: this machine tipped the scales at over 778,000 pounds, engine alone. Add the tender, and you're staring at a rolling mass of nearly 1.2 million pounds, more than any mainline locomotive ever dared to claim. The firebox was a cathedral of combustion, 135 square feet of grate, suspended over 6 driving axles, each axle shouldering up to 86,700 pounds. That's not just heavy, it's surgical. The big boy, by contrast, spread its weight across 8 drivers and a broader frame, wearing its mass like snowshoes. The Allegheny jammed its force through stilettos, each step driving deeper into the earth. Horsepower, the verdict is clear: 7,500 drawbar, unmatched in steam, but the price was paid in steel and stone. On paper, the Allegheny stands as the king, heaviest, most powerful, most concentrated. In the field, it was a tyrant, and the numbers are the autopsy report. The hierarchy isn't a matter of pride, it's a matter of physics, and the verdict is final. The Allegheny's reign was brief, but its shadow lingers in steel and memory. 60 engines, each a monument to excess, carved their initials into the earth and then vanished almost overnight. By 1956, the last of them was condemned, cut up for scrap while their frames still gleamed with factory paint. The diesel revolution offered a quieter, cheaper future. Operating costs for the Allegheny had tripled compared to the new diesels. The railroad's accountants ran the numbers and saw only red ink. A machine built to move mountains became a financial landslide no one could afford to stop. Most of the fleet was fed to the torch, lost before their time. They died young, some with less than a decade's work behind them. But two hulks escaped the smelter. Number 1601 stands silent at the Henry Ford Museum, and another rests at the B&O Railroad Museum. Curators describe them as relics of ambition, reminders that power unchecked can become its own undoing. They polish the brass, sweep the dust, and answer the same question year after year. How could something so mighty be so quickly discarded? The answer is welded into their bones. The Allegheny was too much of everything, a machine that forced its world to bend until it broke. Now, preserved behind velvet ropes, it stands as both warning and memorial, a king without a kingdom, remembered for the violence it left behind. Stand on these battered ties and you still feel the scars. The Allegheny didn't just move freight, it bent steel, warped bridges, and forced the land to kneel. Today, we chase bigger engines, denser trains, heavier loads, forgetting that every leap in power leaves a bruise on what carries it. The lesson remains: build your monsters too heavy, and the earth will break beneath your feet. Tell me what you think below.